Haruki Murakami has a distinct style that can be observed throughout many of his stories, so first we'll start with Airplane, or how he talked to himself as if reciting poetry. My husband is good to me, I love my daughter, I think I'm happy. She sounded calm, even serene, as she said this, without a hint that she was making excuses for her life. She spoke of her marriage with complete objectivity, as though discussing traffic regulations or the international dateline. I think I'm happy. There's nothing wrong. This reminds me of Birthday Girl when the narrator asks her if she's ever regretted her wish. Murakami repeatedly brings up the idea of happiness versus safety and security and doing what you're supposed to be doing throughout many of his stories. But when he was in this room, hearing the trains go by and holding the silent older woman in his arms, he couldn't help but feel that he was wandering through chaos. Again and again he would ask himself, am I in love with her? This second quote really contrasts from the first one. When the narrator is questioning whether or not he loves the woman, he describes the feeling of chaos, not the calm serenity that the woman uses to describe her marriage. This again brings us back to the question of what does it mean to be happy, and what is love and what is the meaning of all this anyway. Should we seek security, or should we look for those times in life that make us feel something? Another thing that we can observe is that Murakami often addresses this idea of adultery, which causes the readers to question the significance and the meaning of these kinds of social conventions and traditions in our everyday lives and the choices that we make because of them. Far more meaningful than the age differences, he felt, were the different tendencies that each individual possessed. He couldn't help thinking that it was an important key for unlocking the riddle of life. So Murakami repeatedly addresses individualism and the perceived differences that people have. When he says he couldn't help thinking that this was an important key for the unlocking of the riddle of life, it makes me wonder if Murakami is giving his readers kind of a clue on how his stories work and how they should be interpreted, which I believe is individually. Yes, it was true, he was as young as newly formed snow. So Murakami uses the age of 20 in several of his stories. He emphasizes this age where we're at a junction in our lives. It's a time when people are still young and have their entire lives ahead of them, but it's also usually the first real experience with responsibility in the real world. So there's this struggle with being an adult, but still not having the maturity or life experiences. So they're stuck in this kind of in-between. And 20 is also the time to question the things that you've been taught and to reform your own perceptions of the world. And I think this is exactly what Murakami wants his audience to do. You may not have been thinking about airplanes, but somewhere deep in a forest, far away, your heart was thinking about them. And yes, he thought, in those days I used to talk to myself as if reciting poetry. So for me, these two quotes are really moving but terribly depressing, because it makes me think of how life and experience really sucks the beauty out of us. Life takes the poetry out of our words, and when that happens, we are no longer able to truly express what our heart is thinking about. Your work should be an act of love, not a marriage of convenience. So now to the kidney-shaped stone. I really love this quote. It goes right back to the question of what gives life purpose and what's really important. What does bring us true happiness? If he put into words, and those words left his mouth, some important something would evaporate like morning dew. Delicate shades of meaning would be flattened into a shallow backdrop. Secrets would no longer be secrets. So again, with this quote, I think Murakami's kind of giving his readers little hints sprinkled throughout many of his stories, really, of what he wants them to get out of it. And in this particular one, it's almost as if he's explaining his use of so much ambiguity, because putting it all into words, putting the meaning into words, changes it. It would let out the secret. So Murakami puts a great deal of significance in what goes unsaid, and the readers are really left wondering what the point was. But I think that it's almost as if the questions that he leaves you with were the entire point of the story. What matters is deciding in your heart to accept another person completely. and it always has to be the first and the last. Murakami emphasizes the importance of individuality and accepting life as it is. So what's truly important is that we follow our hearts and make sure that whatever we do, no matter what we're doing, we do it with our entire heart. So Murakami has several themes and motifs that can be found throughout his stories. He repeatedly brings up the ideas of isolation and loss. And these are, really raw human emotions that any reader can identify with. He constantly challenges our traditions and the role that they have in our lives. Many of his stories have some kind of surreal aspect to them because he's always addressing the idea of reality and the endless different realities that there are due to our individual perceptions. This kind of absurdity emphasizes that. He challenges those perceptions that we already have and provokes us to find out and create our own meaning. Many of his stories don't have a lot that goes on with regard to action. They're kind of melodramatic. However, we still see so much progression that goes on beneath the surface. He also always challenges the idea of time and having multiple subplots tucked into his frame story. He'll have a story within a story within another story. Murakami's style is psychological and introspective. He's always forcing his readers to dig deeply within themselves. He uses ambiguity and places a lot of significance in what is left unsaid in his stories. And he provokes his reader and really challenges our perceptions of our lives and our everyday world.